You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 554.
Hello and welcome back to the Outdoors Station for another audio podcast and video interview. The Outdoors Station, as you know, primarily concentrates on self-powered travel, getting from A to B using your own steam, and an appreciation and understanding of the outdoors world around us. Today my guest is Mark Waring, who's an enthusiastic advocate for pack rafting. We had a discussion and thought it might be a good opportunity to do a couple of videos, this one being an introduction to pack rafting for people that may have heard about it and perhaps wanted to know more about the activity, how to get involved, how much does it cost, etc, etc. We're also going to be doing a second interview later where we're talking in much greater detail about a specific trip that Mark and his colleagues have done. And there's more of that detail towards the end of the podcast. Anything we mention during the podcast for people listening on audio only will be on the show notes on the outdoorstation.co.uk and also in the show notes on YouTube on the video, naturally. So let's now get into my conversation with Mark. So Mark, thanks very much for joining me. I'm fascinating to hear all about pack rafting and what actually it involves. And I think what we'll do with this conversation, because we're going to have two conversations, but this conversation will be an introduction to what is pack rafting and how people can get involved in it. And we'll have a second conversation, which is more exciting about a trip that you've done recently, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Okay.
So for our listeners and for our viewers who have heard the term pack rafting, what is it and how does it differ from other water sports?
Okay. In essence, a pack raft is a relatively simple thing. It's a blow up in inflatable boat, and they typically weigh around about 3 to 4 kilograms. So by looking at its weight, you get the idea really what it's for. It's a pack raft as a waterborne craft. It's a compromise essentially, but it's incredibly versatile. You've got a rubber boat which can pack down very, very small. I mean, some of the most expensive and most advanced pack rafts, in essence, will get down to round about the size of a sleeping bag nowadays. So the idea really is you have a craft that will bear you across water. It's highly portable, and it's there to complement wilderness journeys or just to open up the water on a wilderness journey, which previously, and certainly it was in my case, was prevented you from crossing to the other side to the land. So yeah, pack rafts, simple thing, inflatable boat, highly portable.
So I mean, obviously these days we've got stand-up paddleboarding, which is inflatables. You've got inflatable kayaks, sea kayaks as well. And then you've got the traditional Canadian kayak, sea kayaks, and then you've got ribs, which are obviously a bigger version of a pack raft, I take it. Now, when you say they're packed down that small, I've visualised in my mind a rib, which is obviously a very heavy-duty, chunky piece of equipment, which is quite thick in its construction with the rubber and so on. So are these fairly durable machines, or boats rather, or are they can be quite sensitive to naturally to rocks and things?
Yeah, they're certainly tougher than you think, actually, and particularly with the evolution of materials that can combine lightness with robustness. That said, they're by no means indestructible, and you've got to have a degree of care about them. I learned that myself to my cost when on a pack rafting trip in Sweden about 3 years ago, so pre-pandemic. When at the end of the day, tired, got out, was dragging the boat up on a shoreline, and I dragged it over a rock, and the sharp end of the rock sliced it. So they're not indestructible, but no one's outdoor kit is, and indeed part of your evolution as a pack rafter is, well, understanding the risk that how you can damage them, but it's also about how you can repair them as well, and keep going on that trip.
I suppose it compares quite well to backpacking and using perhaps more technical fabrics, which, although they will do the job, you have to be careful not to drag them through, obviously, bushes and such things. Look after your equipment. So it's a learning curve, I guess.
Yeah, exactly that. With lower weights, you've got to have a degree of care and caution in how you treat your sometimes very, very expensive equipment. So yeah, so if you're used to you're looking after your backpacking kit, making sure that it maintains you during a long trip, then you'll be fine with a pack raft as well. Just being aware at all stages of risks, and that's essentially what pack rafting is about. It's just about an awareness of risk and how you've got to manage it and how you mitigate it.
Right, okay. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up some pictures that you've sent over to me that show the pack raft that you've got and some of the trips that you've been on. Would you like to just describe to people what you can actually take in a raft? Because people might be visualizing it's like a kiddie dinghy, if you like, that all you can do is sit in it. But it's halfway between a boat and a canoe, isn't it? You've got the spray deck and that sort of thing. So I'll bring out some pictures while you talk about it and just show people actually with the sort of kit that you can carry in it while you're having your adventures.
Okay, so the picture you've got here is of my very first pack raft. I'm on my second one now. It was a green Nautic, which is in fact a Russian-made pack raft, even though it's a German brand. And you get the idea of how I used to carry stuff on my Nautic there, which I think is how most people start in pack rafting. You've got a rucksack, and I've had some very heavy loads, rucksack loads. For example, I did a Swedish trip when I was carrying 17 days worth of food. And the way that you would transport it is to get it strapped onto the front of the boat. And because pack rafts, and this is their beauty but also their vulnerability, they can be very, very stable craft in flat water, so you can actually load quite a lot of stuff onto the front of a boat. So my pack raft would quite happily take me at around about 85 kilos, and also a rucksack as well at around about 20 upwards with a 17 days load, and transport us happily on calm, benign water. But then the problem comes when you start to translate a pack raft, which is loaded like the one that you can see there, and you start to put it onto fast moving water and shooting rapids as well, because then you're entering another realm of pack rafting, and essentially a boat loaded like that, you've got much more risk when dealing with it, because you basically, there's more opportunity to get caught, to get snagged. The boat is more unstable, so there's a lot more danger suddenly involved with having a pack raft like that, with the rucksack strapped on, loaded at the front, with lots of straps dangling. So to a certain extent, you can get around that. And my now current pack raft is a much more modern one, more typical of the more expensive ones. And that allows you to store your kit in dry bags actually inside the boat itself. How do you do that? Well, you have what's called a tie zip, which is a zip that's used on dry suits and other such things. And that's a very durable, very waterproof zip. So essentially, before you inflate the boat, you can pack it inside with all your gear. So you've got a clean boat, which is a much safer boat to paddle down rapids. So that changes the way that you can travel using a pack raft, from a boat that can get you across relatively flat, relatively benign water where entrapment is not a problem, to one that essentially is going to start to perform like a kayak, and that's going to let you access and run river systems.
These pictures that we've just been looking at, it just show what remote places you can get to with the pack raft. It's quite impressive, really, and they look very, very remote from that point of view. Is there? I mean, it's a basic question, but I've got to ask it. Is there any sort of licensing that you need to take into account with these things? Is there any necessity for that type of thing, or any need for that sort of legal preparation for it, or is it a very, very young sport and it's still finding its way?
Yeah, it's a young sport. It's still finding its way, but then equally, like kayaking and canoeing, which have been around, both of them, for a very long time. It's very, very similar in terms of that question about licensing. Well, I think in England and Wales, if you want to use your pack raft on rivers, you need to be licensed by having, I think it's the Canoe Association membership, which gives you public indemnity insurance and something like that. Scotland, of course, is different. But when you get out into the wilds of Europe or North America, I mean, I take mine out into northern Scandinavia. I mean, that you've got unlimited rights of access, and that includes water as well. So, as you can see from the pictures which are showing at the moment, uh, it opens up another world of opportunity. So just moving from hiking, you can travel on water almost effortlessly, and it just gives you that other dimension and a whole array of opportunities which are not there if you don't have a pack raft with you.
What's the difference from a pleasure point of view using a pack raft as opposed to a Canadian canoe or a kayak? Is there a difference? Because you can obviously you can carry stuff with in a Canadian canoe, can't you?
You can indeed, but I suppose in a way they're two different things. I mean, if you think about a Canadian canoe, super stable craft, possibly what you would choose naturally to travel on some wild river systems, because you can take a lot of gear in it. They're very agile, maneuverable, and if you know how to use it, that's why the voyageurs in northern Canada essentially opened up the wilds of Canada using them. A pack raft's different, but what a pack raft enables you to do is, for a sort of weight penalty of say 3 to 4 kilos for the pack raft, maybe another couple of kilos with a paddle and your life jacket, you can hike into remote river systems which are essentially locked in by mountains or other wild land. So whilst the pack raft, in essence, as a watercraft, is a compromise, because it's probably not as good in itself as a kayak or a canoe. Try you can't portage a kayak or canoe for more than a relatively short distance, whereas a pack raft, you get your rucksack packed right, you add another 5 kilos to it, you can hike for days to get to that water system that possibly no one else has ever been down before. So it's a compromise, but it's the versatility of what the craft can offer you.
I suppose there's a certain amount of raw adventure in doing that type of thing, particularly in Scandinavia or places which, although they've been mapped and charted in some respects, haven't been explored or enjoyed. But is it not, I'm thinking about it from the safety point of view, presumably it's unwise for somebody who's interested in doing this to start and go somewhere raw like that without a certain amount of preparation, training or experience?
I completely agree with you there, Bob, and I think that's the point, really. So pack rafting is a young sport, but what people are realizing now is a pack raft is actually quite an easy thing to get into and paddle around on flat, stable water. And some people talk about the fact that their primary stability. So you can see from the pictures that they're quite broad and they're flat. They're above water, so they can take a lot of weight, and it doesn't take much to paddle them and to sort of enjoy it. But it's their secondary stability where the problem lies. So they're not as stable, they're not as maneuverable in rapid water as a kayak or a canoe is. So they're more risky. So what people have got to be aware of is pack rafting in itself is very accessible. You can start off and have a fun day out on easy water. But what you've got to appreciate is the risk that is involved in that and the inherent dangers. You can get into trouble very, very quickly in a pack raft. So you've got to start at the point that really pack rafting is a very long, steep learning curve, and even the very top pack rafters realize that, and you've got to be humble on water. So I think anyone who's interested, by all means, have a go at pack raft, see if it's for you, see if it's something that, pun intended, floats your boat, but think seriously about how you're going to improve your safety awareness, how you're going to improve your boat handling skills. So there's ways of doing that. You can learn from friends, and possibly friends who are expert kayakers or canoers, because a lot of the skills are transferable across the boats. But also, even in the UK, there's some good courses that you can go on. And there's some excellent books. I could see on the screen, Bob, that you've put up a copy of the Pack Raft Handbook by Luke Mell, which is a relatively new book. I think it's was published in the last 24 months or so. But many people now consider that the Bible. And Luke Mell, it's a fantastic book. It makes learning fun. As you can see, there's really high quality illustrations in it. But what prompted Luke to write this book, and it's there all the way through it, is about just this risk awareness of what fun you can have and where you can go in a pack raft, but what you've got to look out for, what you've got to consider every day in terms of assessing risk. So yeah, pack rafting, if you're interested, get in one, give it a go. But everyone's at the start of a very long journey. Buy that book. It will make you aware of the array of risks that challenge all pack rafters. Get on a course, learn your boat handling skills, pick up tips from like-minded people, and then if you're thinking of going out on a wilderness journey, by all means do. Ideally, go with others. I mean, having said that, I go on my own, but as well. But I found that you will open up the river more if you're with others and you've got the certainty that there's help around, than if you go on your own, where you've got to naturally be more cautious. And I find when I go on my own, I spend quite a lot of time portaging, which is essentially walking around a set of rapids with everything strapped to you. So you've got to think much more on your own about, again, risk elimination.
Mm. Well, it's definitely another level to transport, isn't it? You've got to look at, especially water's very unpredictable. I understand you were saying earlier on that Luke actually wrote this book due to a fatality, and there's another website I'm just going to call up, which has got a list of fatalities, and presumably where people assess what actually went wrong so others can learn.
Yeah, that's right. So, as I said, Luke essentially was inspired to write this book based on the experience that he and a friend essentially picked up pack rafting around about the same time, and they were learning really by trial and error, or essentially by progressing, and not their mistakes weren't being caught out on their mistakes. Now, what essentially happened to Luke's friend is he drowned in a pack rafting accident, and that caused Luke to stop and to assess pack rafting where his pack rafting was, and pack rafting as a sport. So, as you'll see from that website that you just put up there, Bob, part of that process is he's conducted some analysis of reported pack rafting accidents across the globe, and he's able to draw out certain common themes from those accidents as well. So you start to appreciate risk, and there are various things. Essentially, it's for example, entrapment. So that's having something on your boat, such as a loose cord that might get entrapped when you're going down the rapid, and suddenly you've got a problem which might even pull you under the surface of the water and keep you there. or indeed there are other accidents as well which have happened on flat water, i.e. sea, or more pertinently with pack rafts, very large lakes, which have come about because you're suddenly out in the middle of this large body of water, and fetch gets you. What's fetch? It's essentially the action of wind on water, huge waves that even though you started out in flat water, will push you out of the boat, and then suddenly you're a long way from help. So yeah, so Luke's book and Luke's analysis, while it seems a bit grisly looking at these pack rafting fatalities, and there's still relatively few, but I think that reflects the fact that pack rafting is a young sport, and people are only starting to pick it up. But what he's noticed as well is that the rate of fatalities is lifting up, and presumably that correlates with the fact that pack rafting is becoming more well known, they're becoming cheaper, and just people are simply using it more. So that whilst his exercise may appear to be a bit grisly, it's about picking out those lessons, those learning points from each sad fatality, and so people can reflect and understand how you reduce risk in your pack rafting.
Indeed. Well, I've had one of my daughters has moved to Cornwall, and her children are getting involved in the surf club, as it were. And through them, I've realised just how many accidents happen on very, very simple days with surfers or people just getting into difficulty in water, where you assume that you're on a clean beach or a safe beach, as it were, and riptides and all the other things that water can do can catch you by surprise. But anyway, let's not focus on the negative. I mean, It's there. And, what do they say? Experience, that's the thing you get when you don't get what you want. So we look on the bright side and learn from other people's experiences, no matter how bad it can be. So let's get back to practicalities then. So a pack raft itself, I think you were saying, is a couple of kilos, 4 kilos, did you say?
Yeah, it can. Roughly. I mean, it depends on what your budget is and what you're looking for. So you can get pack rafts which are close to a kilogram, but they're very simple and very expensive. And what they're essentially there to do is to supplement a hike. So when you come across a body of water, you're not going to have to hike around it. But presumably that body of water is a lake. So it's something that's going to get you across a body of water, and then you just pack it away again. And because it's close to a kilo, you'll forget about it relatively quickly.
Okay. Well, what I was thinking was I just wanted to actually talk from a point of view of a complete beginner. What they would actually have to consider over and above your normal backpacking hiking gear, even if you were predominantly concentrating on traveling by water, you still, as you say, got a hike there. So aside from your normal sleeping gear, your tent, your shelter, and the cooking gear, and obviously the food you take with you, you're looking at a basic pack raft, a paddle, wet weather gear, or wet water gear, whatever you call it, I guess, a helmet. Is that about it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, it depends upon what sort of trip you're doing and what sort of water you're crossing. And again, going back to the issue of safety, you're always going to need a life jacket. And again, the sort of life jacket that you take depends on the water you're going to cross. Flat water, there's some very good lightweight inflatable life jackets, but they're going to be no good on moving water where you might get a puncture risk when you need your life jacket most. But a life jacket is always essential. You can't compromise on that. Helmet, you're not really going to need it on flat water. You're going to need it though as soon as you're onto moving water, because essentially you're being pushed down a river where there's lots of rocks quite quickly. So what you want to prevent is that impact if you come out of your boat. So helmets on moving water, certainly. In terms of your clothing, I started off with just using hiking kit, and that works to a degree, but I think you're limited more to the warmer months. The moment you sort of getting onto rapid moving water, or you're essentially going from autumn to spring, so over winter, you're going to need a dry suit again. But to start off, say it's June, the weather's good, you could go on flat water in your hiking gear. You could probably go on moving water, but again, it's about getting wet and then being able to get dry quickly again.
Okay. So for anybody listening to this or watching this now is thinking, well, I'd like to give this a try and see if they can put it on their Christmas list or birthday list or whatever. What sort of is the initial investment are we talking about? Just we'll talk about from a starter point of view rather than experts, because everything changes obviously over time. But what sort of consideration do people have to think about financially?
Okay, I would say on a good starter pack raft, you're probably looking to spend around about £500-600. That said, you do get second-hand pack rafts on sites such as eBay. But yeah, you've got a bit of an outlay there. There are some shops that sell ex-rental pack rafts, for example. So if you look around, you might be lucky to get a decent one for around about £300. You're going to need a paddle, and ideally you want a paddle that breaks down into 4 sections. So as opposed to a sort of canoeing or kayaking paddle, the idea really is you've got one that you can make small. So it's portable. And then with those two things, and of course with the pack raft as well, you need stuff like the inflation bag, which should come with it. And also as well, you're going to need a comfortable seat, which should come with it as well. But yeah, if you want to get started, I guess it's like cycling and a starter bike. You would expect to spend around about £600-700 maybe on getting into cycling, and then of course the sky's the limit thereafter. It depends upon your pockets and your appetite for more.
And taste of in lycra. So,
Yeah.
like any sort of outdoor sport these days, you're looking at if you said somewhere between 700 and £1,000 would get you going. But when you compare that to some of the super light tents, which are £500-600, and decent rucksack, etc., it's very comparable, isn't it? Now I noticed that there's a couple of places that do courses for people that might be interested in doing this, rather than actually taking the risk of buying random equipment and setting out on their own, as it were. So I'll pull up a website which perhaps you can tell us a bit more about. Which run courses, I notice, and bike rafting, which is another aspect, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Backcountry Scott, and there is a guy called Andy Toop who's based up in Aviemore, in one of the sort of trading estates just outside of town. And Andy runs. He's got a couple of strings to his bow. The shop is great. Go and have a look in there if you're around Aviemore. It's full of pack rafts. It's full of bikes as well, and there's some generally good second, third-hand outdoor equipment as well. And there's a lot of knowledgeable and interesting people inside just to go and have a chat to. But as you can see with that pick a lot Morlick, Andy runs courses up in the Cairngorm. So if you want to have a taster, essentially, go on one of Andy's courses, get out onto Loch Morlick and just see if it's for you. You'll see that there's the bike rafting element as well. And as you remember from the beginning of this conversation, when I was talking about how much kit you can get on a back raft, you can sort of break a bike down, just take the front wheel off and you can get it onto the front of the boat. And there you go. There again, you're really accessing wild lands and human-powered travel really to its ultimate degree. You can bike into a wilderness area, you can paddle it, and you can bike out again. So yeah, and Andy Toop at Backcountry Scott, that's a good place to start, just to see if the pack rafting is something for you.
It's actually quite a cost effective as well. I mean, £95 for a day for just the basic pack rafting course, and £195 for the bike rafting. Considering the amount of investment you might have to make long term, it strikes me as good value for money to get out and get a real taste for it in a safe, controlled way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And Aviemore is a pretty easy place to access as well because it's on the mainline rail network. It's the road as well is good up there. So certainly something worth considering. And also just to point out in Andy's sort of Aladdin cave of a shop as well, can have second, third hand pack rafts. So yeah, it'd be worth having a go with on one of his courses and then seeing what he's got in his shop, and you might find yourself starting up for a relatively small outlay.
So we've covered the basics then. We've covered the safety element and looked at obviously how to get started in a practical way. Obviously the cost of investment, which is quite nice. The licensing, I take it you don't need licensing to use Packraft in Scotland.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So that's a great place to get going. Now, I know this is one conversation to introduce people to packrafting with some detailed points on it they might be interested in. All the links to everything that we've shown on the video, and obviously for people in the podcast that want to follow it up, it'll be on the show notes on the Outdoor Station website. But I'd just like to ask you just to tell us a brief part about our next conversation, which is going to be with you and two colleagues, and where you went and what we might be touching on in our next video.
Okay. Essentially what we're going to be doing on our next conversation is we're going to be talking about a more ambitious wilderness trip that you might aspire to after a couple of years of pack rafting. Essentially, in June of this year, myself and David Linton, who maybe a lot of people know his name, and Deborah, who is again based up in the Highlands of Scotland, we embarked on a good testing pack rafting journey up in Swedish Lapland. Down the River Kytum, and essentially this trip it combined the real elements of pack rafting. So we had a good 2 to 3 day hike across rugged mountain terrain with all our gear in our packs and strapped to us. And then we got to a spectacular lake called Kytum Yare, where we did what pack rafters call is the put in. We essentially got our boats ready, put our boats in, and then we began about an 8 to 9 day river journey down the River Kytum for about 140 odd kilometers. And the Kytum really has got everything, because it's a journey with the full grades of rapids. So rapids are waterfalls or moving water over rocks, essentially, and they're graded from class 1, which is essentially water that's rippling up, to class 6, and you can see on the screen there, that's some video I shot of the class 6, which we certainly didn't run. We just went and admired it from the safe confines of the shoreline. But as a river, the Kytum is it's got everything. It's got the full range of experience on it, and it was a proper wilderness journey. And we didn't see anyone else apart from the three of us for well over a week, until we got to Kytum village at the end of our river journey. And the conditions were testing. We started off in cold, cool conditions, and then the weather started to get very hot, and then mosquitoes exploded everywhere. So it had everything that perhaps people want from a
adventure,
a wilderness journey, an adventure. That's it.
Excellent. Okay, well we'll hold it there and whet people's appetite as regards the story that's coming next, and we'll be doing that in the next week or so. So that's fantastic. So Mark, indeed, thank you very much indeed for your time on this. I think it's been a great introduction. Is there anything, do you think, we've missed possibly that people would need to know at this particular level? No,
not really. I just think when you start pack rafting, you're on a journey in itself, a learning curve. But enjoy the challenge, stay humble, be aware of risk, and just be open to the experiences of others. Either through reading books, listening to podcasts. There's plenty of pack rafting podcasts out there. Looking at videos on YouTube or courses or speaking to others. So just keep an open mind, be prepared to learn, and it's really going to give you something. It's a whole new dimension to wild country wilderness travel.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much indeed for your time, and I look forward to talking with you next time, and along with Deborah and David.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Well, my thanks to Mark for taking the time to explain in great detail how to get into pack rafting, and if that's whetted your appetite as he said there towards the end, we will be discussing his Chitum trip in the next conversation that we have. My thanks to everyone that has given me some feedback recently, and it is something I'd really like to encourage if at all possible. So when you see this video either on YouTube or Facebook, or you listen to the podcast, it would be great to get some sort of comments or feedbacks and just let me know that you are enjoying them and we're going down the right route. As we go into 2023, our 18th year of operation. And that's, as you know, well over 550 podcasts to date. I did think I'd stop at 500, but now I'm looking at 1,000 thinking, well, it's possible, it's doable. There are a lot of interesting people out there doing a lot of crazy and interesting, stimulating things. So until next time, folks, stay tuned. We will be releasing another podcast and video next Friday. Until then, take care out there and bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.